Welcome to the Executives Lounge. This is your podcast host, Christine Fonner. We are in season 3, where we continue our mission to redefine leadership one amazing story at a time. The Executives Lounge is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards highlighting what leadership needs to be to practice wholeness, empathy, and provide real-world impact in an ever-changing world. Let's get started. We are here in another episode of the Executives Lounge with Sabine Schoepke. Did I say that right?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. I met Sabine because I did a call for looking for engaging women to talk to about leadership and really looking at redefining leadership. And Sabine is perfect for this because she really helps others redefine themselves in her work. Also a product of doing it yourself, Sabine, right? So I
Yes.
kind of wanted to jump in there today and just say, I'm glad to have you on the show. It's exciting to have you. The conversation that stuck with me when we first met was we kind of jumped in the deep end of like sitting on a mountain and figuring out who we are.
Yes, literally.
I think there's a transcendence that happens when you really, really sit.
Right.
Why did you do that?
That's a good question. No, I did it because I felt like I hit a wall. It already happened before COVID, and then I'm now a retired serial entrepreneur. So I've had multiple businesses throughout my life. I really enjoy connecting the dots, and I get very excited and like I love building things. I love having projects. And so, but once they run, I'm like, okay, I'm out of here, and I sell them and I move on. But just before COVID, I felt like I hit a wall and the fire was out. And then COVID hit and I couldn't sell the company. And then I finally had it sold and handed over in June of 23. And I was just, I don't know, that fire was gone that I have, like
I feel
naturally
like a
have.
lot of people just hit this weird wall and then reset during COVID. I mean, in some ways, it was an opportunity, and in other ways, I think it was, you can go and say, oh, it was soul finding, but I think we had to feel lost before that happened.
COVID actually, for me, presented another opportunity to create a new project because all of a sudden everything changed and it was like, oh, this is exciting. I need to restructure. I need to figure it out on a completely different playing field. So it became a new project. It actually gave me some wind under my wings. And I'm like, okay, let's do
Mm.
this. Like, let's be challenged by this. So that was cool. But then again, I got it to a point where it was like, okay, so now this is working. I'm tired.
Mhm.
I'm just tired. Like, and I was like, okay,
Right.
now can I please hang? And so I did. And then, both of my kids had gone off to college, and I was sitting in LA by myself, and I'm like, and it was really my daughter who had left for Europe, and I was sad she left because I'm really close to her, who said, Mom, the world's your oyster.
Do
You
whatever
don't
you
have,
want.
yeah, you don't have kids
Mhm.
anymore. You're financially free. Like, what are you sad about? Like,
I
go.
do think I do think that there's this luxury in getting to a place in your career where you're like, I did it. I did it. Checkbox. What do I do now? I'm curious because I know some of our listeners are wondering this, that you are a serial entrepreneur. You've built and sold multiple businesses. You are what most in American society would consider successful.
Right.
Um, what do you think is the difference between somebody who starts a business and fails, because about 80% of businesses fail in the first 5 years, right? It's daunting. What do you think the difference is between someone who has a great idea, starts a business, and it doesn't work out, and someone who can start a business, build it, sell it multiple times?
See, but that's the thing. Like, it looks like that, right? Like, it looks like, and people say that to me. They're like, oh my God, whatever you touch turns to gold. But that's not really the truth. The truth
Right. And it's like,
is,
what is it, right? And I
Yeah,
know there's no golden egg, there's no silver bullet, there's no, perfect target. But I think there's like something in you
right.
that allowed for that to happen. What do you think it is?
It's it's really I failed just like everybody else. I mean, out of the seven businesses that I had, there was probably at least seven other ones that I started and that didn't work out. But I don't make these my narrative and I don't dwell on these, but I look at those and I'm like, okay, so if that didn't work, then like what does work? Like I learn them as opportunities to learn from and to grow from without like I might be sad for a moment or darn it, frustrated, but really that's not where I get stuck. And I don't like I've never been like the victim mentality kind of thing. I'm like, no, let's go. Okay, so if that didn't work, let's do something else. So I
Yeah.
think that's the difference. And that's why like my narrative is not about the business that failed, but it's really about the ones that did well.
Right. I think about the product 409, like the cleaner, because
Mm.
the name of the cleaner is 409 because it was the 409th formula that actually worked. So that means there were 408 that did
Yes.
not work. And I think that there's a resilience in that or belief system of like I know whatever I'm going to do is valuable enough to try and I'm just going to keep trying. That's it. That's a big deal.
It is, and it's like when you look at it as this is part of the process to get to where like I ultimately want to go. So, yes, and for me, my number in my head is that 75% of things I try are going to fail, and I'm okay with
Mhm.
that. So I'm like, okay, let's get it out of the way. Let's just get to it. And I don't overthink, like I'm a doer. So, and I don't have all the answers. So if there's something that I want to do, I'm like, let's just do it. Let's try it. Let's throw something against the wall and let's try it. That doesn't scare me. Like I started my first company when I was 19. I was homeless in Toronto on a park bench. I had this vision. I had this idea of what I wanted to do. There would have been a million reasons against like why this would not work. And now looking back, I'm like, that was crazy. Oh my God. Oh wow. This
Mhm.
could have gone really wrong. But that, like, I never look at like, okay, what's my lifeline? What's my plan B? No, I like keep my eye on the ball. I'm like, okay, this is where I want to get. This is what I want to do. Let's do it. Oh, this didn't work. Okay, what's my next option? And
What is the craziest idea you had that didn't work?
there was this really different watch line from Switzerland. And they were like, oh, can you introduce us to the US? And I was like, yeah, this is really cool. This is very different. And yeah, I took that watch line and I went to a bunch of trade shows and I thought I could sell these watches. And I put a lot of money into it with the trade shows and all of that. And then I was like, you don't know what the
Yeah.
hell you're
I worked
doing.
for this company that we brought in new brands from into the US that were not here before. So international brands that
Yeah.
wanted to introduce themselves to the US market. And we were approached by this brand called Douchebags. And they're awesome bags, right? Like they're really cool outdoor bags. They make snowboard bags and ski bags and backpacks and super usable, very smart design bags, but they were called douche bags. And we were like explaining, like in the US, you can't call something a douchebag. It's like a bad thing. And they were like, no, no, we're not going to change our name. And we're like, well, we're not going to take you. But here's the thing, a couple years later, they picked up a new distributor and they're still called douchebag, but in the US it's DB. And now they're selling all over the place. And I was like, see, we should have taken it. But that's an example of like, that
Yeah.
sounds crazy, but who knows if it'll work or not.
Yeah. No, you never
Shout
know.
out to
But
douchebags. I wish I still had a few of their bags. They're great. In our younger years, we are really wrapped up in our identity being our value, and our value being our contribution, and our contribution being connected to career. And so, you're in this place where you've done that. Do you feel like your identity is still really connected to career, or are you starting to feel that separation, or was it never there?
No, it was definitely there. If I think back, like what was important to me and how I lived my life, like where I lived and the house I lived in and the cars I loved and like there it was definitely that. But I think when I realized, and that was just before COVID, when I realized I had an old vision board and I looked at that vision board, I pulled it up from like beneath like a dresser and I was like, oh my God, look at this. And I realized that every single thing on that vision board was checked. And I got so sad. I got so depressed. I was like, I feel
Mm.
no different than before I had these things. There was like a boat on there and this really nice house and the Porsche that I always wanted. And I'm like, I have all this and I feel no different. And I think that's when, like, when you realize you feel no different with all of the stuff that's about identity, that's when you either wake up or you start filling that void with other things that are even more harmful. And I woke up and I was like, oh my God, it's not about this. So what is it about?
Hmm.
And so that's when, for me, part of getting on that mountain, and that's what we're coming like full circle, was about I need to get rid of everything, like everything that I think defines me. So
You got rid of the Porsche?
I got rid of the Porsche and the
Oh.
Range Rover and the Tesla. I got rid of everything. And for like 6 weeks, I had no car at all. And having no car in LA it's really challenging. But I got rid of the house. I got rid of all my furniture, of all my dishes, most of my clothes. I narrowed all of my belongings down to 2 suitcases. And I
Wow.
got on a flight and I landed in Munich and I'm like, okay. And
And
now
now
what?
Germany is where you're from, right?
Originally, yeah, I left
Mhm.
like 39 years ago. I left and I felt drawn to go back there to an area where my grandfather used to have a place in the mountains. And so yeah, I got a tiny little apartment in like an old farmhouse deep in the mountains in a tiny little town where there's no street names, nothing, and just sat there disconnected, like from all of it, everything that could possibly define me. Nobody knew me. People thought I was crazy. Like, who's this woman that looks so different? It was a very traditional area, like with the hair and the tattoos, and they were like, American. Oh my God. And I always thought I was more German than American, but I realized last year, I'm like, oh no, you're actually American. Wow. Okay. To
You're
come.
touching on a few things that I kind of want to slow down on because
Mhm.
you're getting my brain to start being really curious. I mean, one is around identity of our cultures and where we're from and what we experience. With the concept of race versus cultural identity versus like where I'm from, or do I know my story or not know my story? I think I'm going to say this out loud. I think race is bullshit. We're all from the same place.
Mhm.
We're all humans and interconnected in that way. But culturally, our identities can be very connected to a place, especially if we know some of our ancestors' story. And so I kind of want to go there. But I also want to talk about money for a minute because I think there's a privilege to be had when you can start asking these big questions about who I am and what do I
Right.
stand for and what do I care about and do material things really matter to me? There's a privilege in that comes from,
Yeah.
moving beyond survive to thrive. And I really believe that every human being deserves that opportunity in life, that nobody should be living in survive the majority of their life. We should all be able to have the opportunity to move to thrive. And so I want to ask about that a little bit because, you mentioned you went from literally homeless with nothing in your possession to having this privilege. Tell me about that movement from survive to thrive that brought you to the mountains to kind of go back to the basics.
I think it was a necessity to do that, because I think there's a lot of very successful, like way more successful people than I ever was, that have way more money and they wake up like I do and are questioning everything about their life. They feel like you feel like you've climbed the wrong mountain for your entire life, which is not true. It's not. It's the question is, and that's the decisive thing is, so what are you going to do with it?
Are you
Are
going to go
you,
climb a new mountain with different
yes,
purpose?
right.
Mm,
But is it a mountain just like the previous mountain that's focused on, let's just call it achieving, accumulating, or is it the mountain that, like, you're gonna have to get clarity on what really, like, really truly gives meaning to your life? I think that's the biggest and the most important existential question we can ask ourselves. For me, I am not surviving anymore, but I haven't noticed for a while. I am still running. I'm still
mm,
running from like driven by this fear. You lose perspective on where you're really at until one of
yeah.
these like day where this moment where you wake up and you're like, wait a second, what am I doing? I'm still running. Why am I still running? So, but once you get to that point and you have this awakening of like, oh my God, this is a whole different game. Like, what am I playing? What am I playing for? And once you get to that, I really feel like you have an obligation. Like, it's not just a choice, but we have an obligation to do something with this. And that's what's going to make our lives meaningful. So I realized my obligation is like everything that I have accumulated, whether it's lived experiences, it's the knowledge on how to see opportunities, build businesses, make money, all of that I have accumulated wasn't just for the sole purpose of collecting money on my bank account, but what's much more important is what am I doing with that now?
Mm.
So for me, it became really clear I want to help others to feel the way that I feel today, to get to that point.
We were just saying, like, we both believe this, that every human being deserves to
Yes,
feel safe enough in their lives to explore the meaning of their life.
right,
I think that's so critical. And if you think about ancient civilizations, most of the artifacts and the history that we're collecting points to their priority being, why are we here and what happens when we're not? I think
right.
that's something really humanistic about wondering what the purpose is of being here, how to use that time, and then what happens when we leave.
Even nowadays, like the newest studies on the blue zones, right? Like the people who
Hmm.
live the longest are the people who are serving others
Yeah.
in their communities. And I often, people like kind of roll their eyes on me and they're like, well, that's easy for you to say, like
But I think that's
financially.
coming from a place of scarcity when people say that, right?
Right,
Because we're in a society that's broken down those structures that create blue zones. And the blue zones are there because the community and the individuals within the community are operating differently
right.
with different priorities.
Right. And they are not wealthy by any means. You look at people in Greece, for example, it's one of the poorest countries in Europe. They have longevity because they make life meaningful by serving others.
This idea around building new systems and new
Hmm.
ecosystems in communities where that connectivity piece comes back, where you don't fall through the cracks. I mean, this might be a controversial thing to say, but I think a lot of the white male shooters that keep shooting up our schools in this country is because they fell through some care crack
Yes.
in their community. If we look at those people that are falling through the cracks, the homeless people, the violent people, the drug addiction, people who are hurting and homeless and things like that, angry people, I think we can find spaces where they've fallen through the cracks. And I really think as a collective, we need to start thinking about that differently.
Right. And I think we can learn a lot from a lot of other countries. I think the US
Mm,
has some of the biggest problems when it comes to that. I mean, the numbers show it, right? And I
mhm.
think our system is broken in so many ways. When people say to me, well, I wish I could do what you did, like, take a year off but I can't. It's actually you cannot afford not to go.
I think you're touching on the main reason people hesitate and don't is fear.
Yes.
People have this fear of stepping into the unknown because you could fail, right? And that holds people back from accomplishing some of the things that they envy has been accomplished in others, I think.
Right, but I don't think like really you can't fail because where we're at here in the US, this is like the most expensive life you can possibly live. So if you're arguing with money, no, get rid of all your shit right now or put it in storage and get on a plane. That's the most expensive part and go over to Greece or go to Italy or go to Spain where you can live on a few dollars a day. I mean, you need to get out of here. If this is about money, get out of here and do that over there.
Well,
It's
and if you feel like your daily life is trapping you into not meeting some of your dreams, I think that's a number one indicator that change needs to happen.
right. Yeah. And I lost a lot of people because of the choices that I made, but I'm used to it because I always like swim against the stream or I break out of the norm and I do things that are different. So I've lost a lot of friends, like friendships, even family members because of what I did. But the funny thing is, once I came back almost like 11 months later, and people saw like my change and how my energy has changed, and I feel better physically and I look healthier and all of that. They're like, oh, wow. Like the same people who said, you're crazy, you're having a midlife crisis and you're running away from some problem. And I'm like, no, actually, no.
But like,
I,
what if you are like that's what if you are crazy and going through midlife crisis and like throwing cares? What if you are and something really good came of that?
I think if we're, I think we're so programmed to be sheep and to all like fall into this place and like quietly just suffer. But I think the suffering, because even when you conform and you do what everybody else is doing, it's still lonely.
You're now in a place where you really do believe others can step into this kind of place with you. How can people find you and make that happen for themselves?
So I have a website called thepowerlifecoach.com.
Just so everybody remembers, the podcast description will host some of the links and some information about Sabine so you can connect with her and make sure that you can be part of this amazing network as well. I mean, I love that you and I are connected. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to learn from you and with you, and just the excitement of the energy around just getting out of the chains and like going and really finding the meaningfulness in our lives. And we connected on that right away. I'm so
Yes, we
grateful.
did.
We'll have plenty of time to chat again, I'm sure, but I really want to thank you for taking the time today to just have a chat with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today on the Executives Lounge and the latest episode. You can find more information about Christine Fauner at christinefauner.com. And you can find more podcast episodes on Spotify, Apple, the website christinefauner.com/podcast, or LinkedIn.